In this story, a Kentuckian writing under the name Paddy O'Leary tells of the misadventures of himself and his comrades along the Mississippi Delta's Hushpuckena River in the fall of 1877. If you find this series worthwhile, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. For Forest and Stream and Rod and Gun, a week on the Hushpuckena. A party of us, 5 in number, started down the Mississippi about the middle of November last, bent on slaughtering something in the way of game. That is, I speak for myself, for the main hold of the balance of the party was bear. Our generalissimo had collected together, by begging, borrowing, trading, and, I guess, purloining, 6 as large and ferocious curs as one could imagine. Our pack consisted of 7 in all, we taking one old hound that was used to the business as a leader, and the curs to do the fighting. The latter seemed to understand that was intended for them, and to keep in practice they fought among themselves wherever opportunity permitted. While waiting for the train or boat, they would while away the tedious hours by a little wool picking. They fought in the baggage car, on the boat, in the woods, and at camp, or at any place. It made no difference to them whatever. When we were at a loss for other amusement, we could at least have a first-class dogfight with all the latest improvements. As I stated above, we had started down to the game country, but had not determined where we would hunt. We all agreed at last upon the sunflower country of Mississippi. We got off the boat at Australia, 185 miles below Memphis. The weather was all that could be desired, except a little warm for us as we were used to a colder climate. We laid in our supplies at Memphis, and all we had to do now was to find where to go and go there as soon as possible. We made inquiry among the natives and were told that the game was everywhere about there, and back some distance people could scarcely live for the bears. They told such fabulous tales of what a hunting ground Hushpuckena was that we forthwith decided on that as our field of action. The distance varied as much as the men. They called it from 7 to 15 miles from the river. We found a man willing to haul us out there for $5, and we struck out with the firm conviction of eating venison before sundown. We found the roads almost impassable from recent rains, and hauling, as it was in the height of cotton and cottonseed delivering. We were informed that it had been raining more or less for 3 months, and it looked like it, for the low ground was full of water. An immense amount of cotton was still standing out, as the weather would not permit its being picked. We found we had blundered by coming this season, but were hopeful, as every one we met assured us we would have good sport. There were lots of bears, and gave us thrilling accounts of how they stole their pigs and destroyed their corn, etc. How we waded water and split mud. What cared we for that? All we wanted was to get a peep at a bear. We looked upon the simple-minded natives with contempt for not dropping everything else and going a-bear hunting. We had to give up all notions of aiding ourselves and be content if we could only get our luggage hauled. The mules composing our team were small, and like all others, lazy, and the man driving had to lay the whip on vigorously, accompanied with choice expletives. I was raised in the Sunday school and forbear quoting, as such language jars my nerves. We got within 2 miles of our destination when the team gave unmistakable signs of giving completely out. We concluded to strike camp and trust to luck to get the balance of our way, as it was then after sundown. While the others were fixing around for the night, the general and I struck out through the cane to get some venison for supper. My gun was an old hammered-barrel Kentucky rifle of about 50 to the pound. The barrel was 45 inches long and looked as if the maker had just that much iron in a piece and did not want to cut it. It was a trusty old piece, however, and was just as good 200 yards as 10 if held straight. The others had shotguns. The general and I stayed out until dark but found no game. We saw some old deer sign and a bear track or two, which gave us hope. The next morning was the Holy Sabbath, and while some were hunting up a team, I shouldered Long Tom and struck out through the woods. The others at camp, being of a religious turn of mind, declined following except far enough to get some hickory nuts, and for fear of meeting a bear, carried a large 6-shooter along. I went about 2 miles through wet slashes and low cane ridges covered with switch cane. I saw some of the finest oak timber I ever saw, but very little sign of game. We got a team without much trouble, and noon found us camped on a low ridge with cane and water all around us. The cane was on 3 sides of us and varying from 10 to 20 feet high, while the water was in front and was from 2 to 6 inches deep. Not a very cheering place for a camp, I admit, but when the old man that hauled us out got warmed up with the jigger, as he called it, and his tongue loosened, and began his marvelous tales of the amount of game about there, I reckon there never were 5 happier souls than we were at that time. After getting things fixed up, I slipped out to leave the woods and look for signs. I found a few deer tracks and some of the heaviest cane brakes I ever heard of. Cane from 20 to 30 feet high, as thick almost as they could stand. One can draw some idea of their density by this. There were places where the cane had fallen down and bent over so that a man could walk over them. I walked on the top of cane 4 feet from the ground. It was like walking on rotten ice through which one would break now and then, and was fully as hard to scramble up on the cane as it is to get on the ice after breaking through. And the imagination of falling into a den of wildcats or a nest of bears fully equals the tickling sensation of freezing water slipping up one's leg. 2 of our best bear hunters had also gone out with the dogs and were kicking up a fearful racket. I thought certain they had a bear up, but learned presently it was only a dog fight. They reported lots of bear sign, and we went to bed early so as to get at them soon. The morning dawned bright and beautiful, and we were almost tasting bear meat. In fact, we got up quite a discussion how we should cook it. Our dog commander summoned his forces, and 3 of us took stands where we thought the game would be most likely to run. The dogs would not hunt, none except the hound, and anyone who has had anything to do with hounds knows that one by itself is not much. Our famous bear dogs would trot along behind and wait for us to break roads through the cane for them. I waited sloughs and cane breaks all day, and all I could get a shot at was a black squirrel. I skinned it and stretched its hide, as it was something for curiosity, for I began to fear that our trophies of the chase would be small. I found considerable sign of game, but it was of old date, as if the game had made an exodus about the time we arrived. I stayed out until near sundown. The other men came in at noon and went out again. They had not got in from their afternoon's hunt when I got in. I learned from the cook that their spirits had undergone a change since morning. Dogs would not hunt, water and cane so bad. Where the cane was, one could not get through scarcely at all, and the water was very disagreeable wading, as none of us had gum boots. After tramping all day, I felt as if I had a great vacuum somewhere. After getting all right again, I started out to blaze some trees so we could find our way to camp more easily, for one might be within 40 feet of it and not know it unless someone there would make a noise, as the cane completely hid it from view. It is the most glorious place to get lost in I ever was. I met the other fellows coming in, and they were in glorious spirits. They had struck a bonanza, sure. They were terribly excited. Such signs as they had seen surpassed anything we had imagined in our wildest dreams. Tracks as large as a man's hat. Trees literally torn up by the roots. Beds large enough to accommodate 20. The largest bear we ever heard of, etc., etc. I flew back to camp and got the axe and cane knife, and we worked manfully, cutting roads, bridging sloughs, and blazing paths, and fixing up for a general havoc the next day. We went back to the camp, tired, wet, and that boon of a hunter's life, hungry but perfectly happy. Just after dark it commenced raining, and rained most gloriously until daylight. Our tent was ordinary duck, not waterproof nor well stretched, and we got ourselves and everything else except our powder wet. We managed to keep our guns and ammunition tolerably dry and let the rest go. The morning was the most gloomy and heaviest clouded I ever experienced. The clouds were scudding across the sky from a southwesterly direction and looked as if at any moment they would burst open and give us a second flood. We ventured out, however, and did our best to raise a bear, but after wandering around for a couple of hours without success, gave it up as a bad job and returned to camp a sadder, if not wiser, lot of men. It was impossible to go anywhere. We would start off getting the course from the compass, and after wandering around a while would find ourselves anywhere but where we wanted to be. We would get lost in 5 minutes, and if we had not had stationed a man with the horn to give us the course, we might have been there until now. I could not stay in camp, and after reading a little, I struck out on my own hook. The sloughs had risen 4 inches from the rain, and the cane was so wet I got soaked through in going a short distance. It commenced raining about 2 hours before night, and found me 2 miles from camp without my coat, and sloughs, cane brakes, etc., without number. I got my course and lit out, and got in about as wet as possible for a man to be. The sum of the third day's hunt was a large hawk that I knocked over, and 4 as wet men as ever came along. The bear hunters were exceedingly low, and I began to fear that even burnt brandy would not save them, although frequent visitations to the jug containing the raw article seemed to help them a little. The rain continued all through the night, and it was none of your gentle, refreshing southern showers which one reads of. It was a regular pour-down, and it was only by the hardest exertion we kept our fire alive. The fourth morning dawned almost as gloomy as third. Water everywhere, in camp and out. A few of us ventured out, but found our roads impassable from water. When we got back to camp, we found our old friend the teamster had come to get us out of the water. There was nothing remarkable about him, and he was far from handsome, but we were about as glad to see him as most anyone we could name. Dom Pedro was nowhere. We brought the jug and drained it for one more jigger, which he turned off with a vim. As I was one of the young men of the party, I was detailed to go for his wagon. I had a nice, pleasant walk of 2 miles through the cool, refreshing water, which varied from 4 to 12 inches deep. All things must have an end, however, and the middle of the afternoon found us camped on the high banks of Hushpuckena and happy once more. The stream we were camped on is a tributary of the Sunflower River, and heads somewhere in the northern part of Bolivar County. It seems to be a considerable stream, large enough to float a small steamer. I did not see much of it, though, and no one around there seems to know anything about it, and as it is not laid down on any maps that I have seen, it is altogether guesswork with me. The morning of the 5th day was gloomy as ever. We killed a few squirrels and made a deer drive without getting a run. About noon an old bear hunter came to our camp, wanting to take a hunt with us. He brought about a dozen half-starved, nondescript dogs, all shapes, all sizes, and colors. He vowed, though, that they would not cross a trail, and if our dogs would only help his to do the fighting, we were as good for bear as a bit is for a Barlow. His dogs came near to making a bear trail of our camp by eating everything they could find. It was only by the cook's judicious use of a 2-handed club, intermixed with some very formidable oaths, that we saved anything. After dinner we got a couple of mules and our best bear hunter, and the stranger mounted them. I now thought bear certain, for it was a strong force mustered out that gloomy November evening. Our old friend of the team summoned his forces, of himself and 3 boys and a half-dozen dogs. Our general started off blowing to the dogs, and all began to look lovely, and the goose hung away out of reach. That was the first act of the drama. The second was more exciting, and came near being more tragical. The mule that our general was on suddenly became displeased with the dogs, crowd, or something else, and all at once there was a grand panorama of a buck-jumping mule, flying guns, and a bear hunter going through the air, making several revolutions to the minute, as if he had suddenly conceived the idea of making a windmill out of himself. After enjoying a good laugh, the first for several days, the general picked himself up and continued the hunt on foot. They seemed to have enough in the bear gang without me, and I struck out on my own hook. I had seen some fresh deer tracks that morning, and I wanted to go back to the same place. I saw 2 fine deer, the first sighted by any of the party. I followed them some time, but could not see them any more. I returned to the camp in good spirits, for I believed I or someone else of the party would get one the next day. I found the bear hunters had returned without getting a run, and the sum total of the hunt was a coon and a possum. The latter they had managed to lose coming in. Our party now began to get the blues to an alarming extent. The bitters had given out, and as we had no way of replenishing them, I suggested a dog fight, thinking to arouse them a little from the slough of despond. But they sadly shook their heads. Even dog fighting had lost its charms. The night was enlivened by a herd of cattle that smelt the 150 pounds of salt that we brought along to salt our bear meat. They would tramp all around the camp, walk over the dogs, poke their heads into the tent, and scatter our traps promiscuously. At the first peep of day, 3 of us went for deer. After waiting some time, one of our party obtained a running shot, but effected nothing. We returned to camp and put in the day by chasing the cattle away from camp. The 7th morning was cool and frosty. 4 of us went for deer, but with the same success as heretofore. Got nothing. We now came to the following conclusions. Firstly, that there was plenty of game there. Secondly, that it would stay there for all we could do to keep it from it. Thirdly, that bear meat was dry anyhow. Fourthly, that home was the best place after all. The above resolutions being unanimously carried, we set about preparing to leave. The next day being Sunday and teams idle, it was decided to leave then. A drizzling rain fell all day, and we failed to get out to the river on Sunday, but Monday found us on our way. I took one more little round for deer and joined the party about 2 miles from camp. I laid old Long Tom sadly in the wagon, and I will not say what I thought about bear hunting then. The roads were better, as the rains had thinned the mud, and if one did go a little deeper, it was not so hard to get out. We got to the river in time to board a boat before night, and were happy again. Some of your readers may wonder what I wrote this for, as there is nothing remarkable chronicled in it. No hair-breadth escapes from panthers or wolves or suffocating hugs from bears or anything else like most of the letters to your paper contain. That is just it. I wish to state to some of the uninitiated that a hunter's life has its ups and downs as well as any other, that it does not always run smooth and flow with milk and honey. Although we made a miserable failure, we are far from being disheartened, and if everything works right, next November will find some of us back there. We have learned the way and got acquainted a little, and with the right kind of season, a party could have glorious sport, as there is any amount of game there. Signed, Patty O'Leary, Ashbysburg, Hopkins County, Kentucky. If you found this worthwhile, please like, share, and subscribe, and be sure to check out our website, canebreaks.com.